Silverwing is being read with permission of HarperCollins Children's Books. Hi everyone, we are reading part 2 of our novel Silverwing today. So in part 1 last time we were introduced to the main characters and the setting in the story. So the main character's name is Shade, and he is a Silverwing bat, and he lives in Tree Haven, which is a big old tree that all the bats live in. His mom's name is Ariel, and the other young bats that he is, I don't know if we would call them friends, but the other young bats are Chinook, Jared, Yara, Ostrich, and Penumbra. And take a second, see if you can think back about what happened in part 1. What did Shade want to see? The sun. He wanted to see the sun. And they have been told that if they see the sun, they'll turn to dust, that they're not allowed to stay out past what's called the dawn chorus, which is the birds singing that the sun is coming up. And he, Shade, decided he wanted to see the sun. And he challenged Chinook, because Chinook was kind of bugging him with his tall tales about his bats attacking owls. So they kind of stayed up to see the sun, even though they weren't supposed to. And Chinook kind of got scared and left, and then Shade was chased down and basically attacked by an owl, and his mom came to his rescue, and they did make it out safely, but that's kind of where we left off. So let's see what happens next. Part 2, Tree Haven. Tree Haven was a vast, ancient oak with furrowed bark and thick, gnarled roots buckling from the ground. Hundreds of years ago, it had been struck by lightning, killing the tree and petrifying the outside. The Silverwings had hollowed out the great trunk and the many branches and used it as a nursing colony ever since. Every spring, the females returned to give birth and rear their young. It was perfect. There were only a handful of openings, well-hidden knotholes through which the bats flew every dawn and dusk. No birds or beasts could work their way inside. The bats made their roosts on the mossy inner walls, in crevices and ledges and hollows, and inside the multitudes of branches snaking from the trunk. As Shade burst through the knothole with his mother, the bats roosting around the entrance looked over fearfully. Outside, the owl screamed again in fury as it battered the tree with its claws, once, twice, before flying off, hooting balefully. As he made a quick landing beside his mother, Shade heard the flurry of questions over his racing heart. What happened? And why were you out so late? And didn't you hear the dawn chorus? And how did you escape the owl? Ariel ignored them and turned urgently to Shade. Are you hurt? Don't think so. His mother inspected his wings and tail anyway, roughly nosing his ribs and stomach to make sure nothing was broken, nothing cut. Then she folded her wings around him and held him tight for a long time. He realized she was trembling, and when she pulled back, her eyes shone with anger. Why did you do that, Shade? Shade looked away. He was aware of the other bats nearby, felt the fur burn across his face. He spoke quietly. Chinook was He was saying things about owls and how his father fought one, and I just wanted to do something. He was about to say something brave, but she cut him off. It was a childish thing, a dangerous thing. She made no attempt to lower her voice. You could have been killed like that. She flicked the tip of her wing so it made a sharp, final snap in the air. And Chinook with you. How'd you know about Chinook? I ran into him while looking for you. So he told on me then, Shade scoffed. Lucky for you he did. She stared at him. It was foolishness like this that got your father killed. Shade couldn't speak for a moment. He wanted to see the sun? He asked urgently. She'd never told him this. All he knew about his father's death was that last spring he was out one night, too far from the roost, too late, and an owl hunted him down in the dawn's light and killed him. His father's name was Cassiel. Ariel nodded, suddenly weary. Yes, he was always talking about it. Because he was curious. No, because he was headstrong. Because he wouldn't think. All her anger surged back. That's not going to happen to you. I won't lose both my mate and my son in 1 year. I won't stand for it. Why didn't you tell me? Shade felt abruptly resentful. I didn't want to give you any ideas. You've got enough of those as it is. She sighed, and her eyes lost their fierceness. You sure you're all right? Why did he want to see the sun? Promise you'll never do that again. Did you make my father promise? Will you promise me? She insisted. It's not right, said Shade, frowning. I mean that the owls don't let us see the sun. Do you think that's fair, Mom? She gave an exasperated sigh and closed her eyes for a moment. It has nothing to do with fair or right or wrong. It's just the way things... She broke off in annoyance. I'm not going to argue with you. You do as I say. It's as simple as that. You don't know the trouble you've caused for all of us. But why? We got away. But he didn't finish because Mercury, the messenger for the colony elders, was making a slow spiral down the trunk toward them. You're both all right? He asked as he settled gracefully beside them. Yes. The elders are anxious to speak with you. Are you strong enough to go up to the roost, or shall I ask them to come see you here? No, I can go. Stay here, Ariel told Shade. They asked you to bring your son. Shade shared a quick look with his mother. He'd been in trouble before plenty of times, but this was the first time he'd been summoned before the elders. Mercury launched himself back into the air, and Shade followed after Ariel, back up the trunk. He sensed the gaze of 100 bats as he ascended, and felt acutely self-conscious, but pleasantly flushed. Usually nobody even gave him a second glance. Now, he was important enough to be called before the elders. He let his eyes boldly pass over the curious faces of the roosting onlookers. And there was Chinook beside his mother, but he looked away before Shade could shoot him a smirk of triumph. You've got nothing to smile about, Ariel snapped. Hurry up. They'd passed countless passageways and were nearing the upper reaches of the tree now, and Shade felt a queasy twisting in his stomach. He had never been this high. The central trunk came to a blunt end, but Mercury led them into a branch that veered straight upward, kinking and curving as it reached into the sky. At the branch peak hung the 4 colony elders, quietly speaking among themselves as Shade and his mother found roosts beneath them. Mercury fluttered to Frida and whispered in her ear before retreating to a small crevice in the shadows of the chamber, ready if called upon. Aurora, Bathsheba, Lucretia, and Frida. Shade knew the names of the elders, but he had never spoken to them. He saw them only from a distance, and they filled him with a kind of awe. They were all old bats, well beyond childbearing, and it was strange for Shade to see females in the roost, without newborns nearby. Frida was the oldest of the 4, and to Shade the most mysterious. Her actual age wasn't known, but no one could remember a time when she hadn't been chief elder of the Silverwing colony. Her wings were creased, but still supple and strong, and her claws were gnarled like the roots of an old tree, but wickedly sharp. According to Shade's mother, Frida was still a fierce hunter. The fur around her face was shot through with more gray than silver or black now, and there were a few mangy patches on her body, which were probably just signs of age, but Shade liked to think that at least some of them were old battle scars. The most mysterious thing about Frida was the small metal band around her left forearm. No other bat in the colony had one. Shade asked his mother about it frequently, but she just shook her head and told him she didn't know where it came from or how Frida got it. The other newborns were just as hopeless. There were a few half-hearted suggestions, but, and this was always infuriating to Shade, no one seemed very curious or interested. Frida had a band, and as far as they were concerned, that was that. You made a close escape by the sounds of it, Frida said to them now. But why were you out so late, Ariel? What happened? I was looking for Shade. Was he lost? This was Bathsheba, and her harsh voice put Shade on edge. No, said Ariel. He made a foolish dare with Chinook. They were waiting for the sun to rise. Where is Chinook? Asked Frida. He's safe. He had the sense to return to Tree Haven before sunrise. Shade frowned and had to clamp down on his mouth to keep quiet. The sense? Chinook had the sense? No, Chinook got scared. He flew off like a frightened moth. Yet your son stayed, said Frida, staring so intensely at Shade that he had to look at his feet. Yes, and I found him just in time. An owl was waiting in the tree, ready to take him. But the sun rose before you reached Treehaven, said Bathsheba pointedly. Yes, Ariel replied sadly. There was a brief, terrible silence in the elder's roost, and when Bathsheba next spoke, Shade could not believe what he heard. Then you should have left your son for the owl. I know, Ariel said. Shade looked at her in horror. It is the law, Bathsheba persisted. I know the law. Then why did you break it? Shade saw the anger flare again in his mother's eyes. I did what any mother would have done. The betrayal Shade had felt only seconds ago was washed away in a swell of pride and love for his mother. Bathsheba began an angry reply to this, but with a gentle whoosh, Frida spread her wings wide, and the other bat fell silent. We know what you suffered in the spring, Ariel, and how bravely you've dealt with the loss of Cassiel. But you're right. What you did was only natural. But the law is not natural. It is cruel. Bathsheba chittered impatiently. Everyone was saddened by the death of Cassiel, but Ariel isn't the only one to lose a mate. Many of us have too. You say the law is cruel, Frida, but it can help us too. The law helps keep us safe at night, not by day. If we are obedient, we can at least avoid some of these needless deaths. She directed her hard eyes at Ariel again. Your actions were selfish, and you've put the whole roost in danger. And here's a little picture of Treehaven. Frida sighed. This, I'm afraid, may very well be true. Terrible as it is, Bathsheba continued coldly, if you'd left your son, the owls would have taken him, and this would be over. Now, they will feel cheated. They will want justice. Ariel nodded. Yes, I know this is my fault. No, Shade blurted before he could stop himself. He hated the resignation in his mother's voice, hated the way Bathsheba glowered down at her. How dare she talk to his mother like this? Every set of eyes was on him now, and he felt all the thoughts in his head whirl uselessly. I mean, it's my fault, he hurried on. It was me who wanted to see the sun. I talked Chinook into it, but really the sun hardly came up at all, so I don't see why the owls were so upset. I'm sorry I've caused this trouble, and I don't know much about the law, but I think it's cruel and unfair, just like Frida said. In the following silence, Shade wished, for the first time in his life, that he could be even smaller than he was. So small, he would just blink out altogether. You've obviously coddled your boy, Bathsheba said frostily to Ariel, and made him headstrong and insolent. Didn't you tell him how dangerous the sun was? It didn't turn me to dust, Shade mumbled. He couldn't believe he'd done it again, the words just slipping out. What? Bathsheba said. Or blind me, Shade muttered. The sun, those were just stories. That's enough, Shade, his mother said sharply. I plan to punish him, she told Bathsheba. Bathsheba snorted, unimpressed. Ha! Little good that will do if the owls demand compensation. We'll worry about that later, said Frida sternly. The boy only did what many of you would have liked to, or maybe you've forgotten that. He is young and foolish, yes, but don't be so quick to judge. Thank you, Ariel. Shade, rest well. Frida turned her piercing gaze on him once again, and Shade felt strangely illuminated by it. He looked back into the old bat's dark eyes for only a moment, which was as much as he could endure, before humbly bowing his head and muttering his goodbyes. By the time Shade and his mother left the elder's roost, most of the colony was already asleep, hanging from their roosts, the newborns pressed close against their mothers, enfolded in their wings. Wash up, his mother told him when they'd settled back at their roost. Shade started licking the dust and grit from his wings. The owl already seemed like such a long time ago, but he conjured up the silent pounding of its wings, the quick whistle of its flashing claws. We did make a pretty great escape, didn't we? He said. Thrilling, said his mom tersely. I really did see the sun, you know. She nodded curtly. Aren't you interested? No. Are you still angry with me? No, but I don't want you to be like your father. Not much chance of that, Shade grimaced. He was a big bat, right? Yes, he was a big bat, but you might be one day too. Might. It wasn't very satisfying. He looked up from his licking. Mom, a bat can't kill an owl, can he? No, she said. No bat can. Right, said Shade sadly. They're too big. There's no way any bat could do it. Shade, forget what Chinook said. Yeah, said Shade. Here, you've got a big dirty patch. She came closer and began pulling her claws gently through the fur on his back. I can do it, said Shade, but only half-heartedly. He relaxed his aching shoulders as his mother combed through his fur again and again. A wonderful floating feeling lulled him, and he felt safe and warm and happy, and wished he could always be like this. But as he closed his eyes, the image of the rising sun, that dazzling silver of light, still burned on the back of his eyelids. Shade tried to feel sorry for what he'd done, but it wasn't easy, especially when he realized he was famous, at least to the newborns. The very next evening, Ostrich, Yara, Penumbra, and several others demanded a full retelling of his adventure with the owl, and he was only too happy to oblige, mostly sticking to the truth, but occasionally juicing it up with a few made-up details. Chinook stayed away, and Jared too, but Shade knew it would all get back to them. He didn't have long to revel in his new fame, though, because soon the roost emptied as all the bats left for the night's hunting, and Shade had to stay behind. This was part of his punishment. He was grounded. He had to stay in Tree Haven all night with the old, boring bats who were too feeble to do much hunting, and preferred it inside anyway. For 1 hour at midnight he'd be allowed out to feed, but even then his mother would be right beside him, and he couldn't stray out of sight of the roost. He wasn't too upset by this, since he knew they'd be leaving Tree Haven on their journey in 2 nights anyway, and his punishment would be over then. Still, he wasn't going to let the time go to waste. Inside the trunk, he practiced his takeoffs and landings. He targeted twigs or bits of moths with his echo vision, pretending they were tiger moths, and dove in for the kill. And all the while he was thinking about the sun, about the owls, and he thought about his father, who, like him, had wanted to see the sun. Over the months, he'd practically deafened his mother with questions about Cassiel, how he looked, what he was like, but try as he might, he'd never been able to feel a connection with him. Now, though, knowing about how he died, he felt a frail spider's thread running between them. He was just a runt, but he'd wanted to see the sun, just like his father. He was catching his breath after a spectacular dive bomb when he felt a rush of air around him and looked to see Frida settling beside him. Tell me about the sun, she said. Shade's tongue felt too heavy. The chief elder of the colony stared with those piercing eyes. Her wings creaked as she folded them against her body, and he was aware of a slightly musty odor rising off her. The smell of age, he supposed. But she smiled at him, and her face wrinkled at the eyes, and Shade felt less nervous. Well, I saw it, he began hesitantly, and then stumbled on and told her everything he could remember. It wasn't much, but he was eager to tell it. Delighted, really. His mother certainly didn't care. Frida listened carefully, nodding now and then. You've seen it too, haven't you? He asked impulsively. You're right, I have, a long time ago. It's round, isn't it? Like the moon? Yes, but bigger. He shook his head in amazement. He couldn't even imagine the brightness of it. You just wanted to see it then, like me? He asked Frida. She nodded. When I was younger, a lot of us did. Some were willing to die for it. Not like now. They don't care. They might think the law is unfair, but they aren't willing to fight it, like Bathsheba. And in many ways, they're wise. Look at your father. Look what almost happened to you and Ariel. How come we're not allowed to see it? I mean, I know it's the law, but why? We are banished creatures, Shade, and have been for millions of years. Banished? Punished. Sent away. For what? What did we do? It's easier if you hear for yourself. Come with me. That's the end of that chapter. Okay, so that was quite a chapter. So we were introduced to the elders of the colony, and two in particular kind of stood out. So Bathsheba was quite unkind. She didn't really have any patience for what had happened. But Frida was an interesting character that Shade met and talked to. And she was a little bit more forgiving. And we learned that it's actually against the law for the bats to be out after the sun comes up, and that they were banished. And we haven't really heard why or what that means. And that's kind of where the chapter left off, which is kind of exciting. So Shade also learned a little bit about his father, and that he had wanted to see the sun, and that's why he died. And that Frida also, like a lot of them when they were younger, what she was saying was a lot of the elders used to want to see the sun. So there's kind of some history going on about what's happening there. We also found out that Frida has a band around her foot. So an interesting chapter, kind of exciting. I'm not sure what's going to happen next, but there's stuff going on with the bats and the owls. They seem to have a little bit of a history. So my question for you was, what do you think was the most important part of that chapter? And you can always go back and reread parts to see what kind of stood out for you. What do you think was the most important part? Let me know in the comments, okay? Thanks, guys.